Welcome to All Saints Church here in Rudston in East Yorkshire, home of the Rudston Monolith, the tallest prehistoric standing stone in all of the United Kingdom and the British Isles, sitting right next to All Saints Church itself here. And they both sit in the middle of a large prehistoric ceremonial landscape featuring henges, cursus monuments, barrows and burial mounds, all seemingly focusing in on this one location. So we're going to have a look at the monolith itself, trying to work out why it's here, why there's this larger ceremonial landscape here, why the church was put here, and how all that links to Bede's ecclesiastical history of the English people, and what he tells us about the siting of Christian places of worship on pre-Christian sacred spaces, along with the adoption of pre-Christian festivals, including the festival of Eostermonath, the month dedicated to the goddess Eoster, who gave her name to the Christian festival of Easter. My name is Chris, this is Church Searcher, and I'll see you after the map. So the Rudston Monolith is 7.6 metres high, 1.75 metres wide and 1 metre thick. And it's estimated to weigh anywhere between 26 tonnes all the way up to 40 tonnes, depending on how far beneath the ground it extends. And according to the antiquarian who excavated this back in the day, it goes as deep below as it is above. It's made of gritstone, which is a particular type of stone you get up on the North York moors. The closest outcrop to here is about 10 miles away in Bridlington, Caton Bay, not far from Scarborough. You've also got an outcrop in Gromont on the North York moors, but either way it's quite a long distance to drag this overland if it was brought here by human activity. The other thought is it might have been brought here by the action of a glacier. The whole of the Yorkshire wolds, the area in which we're in geographically, was formed by post-glacial activity. When the ice sheets melted, you had rushing waters forming all of the dry valleys which characterise the Yorkshire wolds and give it these beautiful rolling valleys which create the area around here. But it's that ice that might have actually brought the stone here to Rudston. Now, I first came here about 15 years ago because of a book, I think, called Mysterious Britain. And in that it had sort of one side with a photo of the Rudston Monolith here, and on the other facing page there was a bit of text. And in that text it explained that in the Rudston Monolith there are thought to be the footprints of dinosaurs preserved in the stone. If you look at it in a certain light, you can see there's these possible indentations which sort of go up at intervals. And if you come at a certain time of day, you can kind of see these impressions in the stone working their way up. There's some sort of smaller, deeper ones at various intervals, but then if you look carefully, there's also some shallower but much wider ones going up. So you can imagine if these were dinosaur footprints preserved in the stone here, what that might have meant to a pre-Christian culture, these footprints in a stone. It would have made this quite a unique and extraordinary piece of ritual architecture. However, in 2015, English Heritage came along and they did an analysis of the stone, including photogrammetry, and they came to the conclusion that now there's no surviving evidence of there being dinosaur footprints in the stone here. But you still can see these sort of impressions and dimples in the side of the stone at regular intervals. So, you know, who knows, there might not be conclusive evidence anymore, but perhaps at one point there were these dinosaur footprints preserved in the Rudston Monolith itself, which must have been extraordinary. So the name of the village here, Rudston, gives us a bit of a clue as to what's going on here. Rudston derives from the old Anglo-Saxon Rood stane. Rood was the old word for a cross, stane a stone. So the village is named after this stone itself, which was perhaps reconsecrated with a cross on top of it as Christian missionaries came through. Now in the Domesday Book there's no mention of a church here, so there was possibly maybe a wooden chapel which was destroyed before the church was built here in 1100 AD by William Peveril, who was the Norman baron in this area. Now the only existing part of that original Norman church is the tower, and you can just see the walled up Norman door in there, and also the font inside the church, which has this interesting cross and circular motif carved into it. Now it's in the corner of the churchyard here behind me, where there's another stone of the same material, much smaller, and beside that there's a pair of Cist or Cist burial chambers which were excavated from one of the round barrows not far from here. So in the corner of the churchyard we've got another piece of gritstone here, which is seemingly in alignment with the main monolith behind. We've also got the remains of a Roman grave here, and then to the side there is the surviving stone structure of an ancient Cist or Cist burial excavated from a barrow on Rudston Beacon, which were excavated between 1869 and 1870 by an antiquarian called Canon Greenwald. And there's two chambers here. One of them contained the skeleton of an adult with two children at its feet, along with a clay beaker and a piece of burnt ironstone, iron ore. The other one contained cremations, two adults, I think, along with a beaker as well. And in between the two of them, there was another cremation, again with a clay beaker. Now the burial mound itself was about 20 metres in diameter, but only about 1.5 metres high, and that's because it had been reduced by the action of ploughing over the centuries. But inserted into that, there were more burials and cremations, along with, again, these clay beakers and various tools, all from the period of the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, so contemporary with the Rudston Monolith. So the burials were all sealed in with a layer of burnt earth and charcoal, and they form part of this large ritual landscape all around this area. Now the two earliest monuments were a pair of round barrows, and they're unusual in that they're from the late Neolithic rather than the Bronze Age, which is more characteristic of the round barrows. There are long barrows as well from that period, as well as these long cursus ditches which radiate out from this central point. Cursus ditches are interpreted to be these ceremonial routeways where people would come into these central places. Now if you look at this area on the map, you'll see all the monuments are clustered around this valley called the Great Walled Valley, and through that runs a river or a stream called the Gypsy Race. Now amazingly, this is the only free-flowing source of water in the whole of the Yorkshire Wolds, and it's actually an intermittent river. It isn't always here, it's gone one month, here the next. So it's quite an ephemeral river, and in fact it comes out here in Rudston. There's a large sort of right-angled bend, and then it flows on towards Bridlington, possibly the source of the stone here at Rudston, in the Rudston Monolith. Now it actually runs underneath the ground about 8 or 9 miles before it comes out here. Now interestingly, it's at the bend in rivers that you often find prehistoric meeting places like henge monuments, and it's at springs where you often find ceremonial structures and monuments like the Rudston Monolith. But obviously this seems like this was perhaps the focal point of all this religious activity here. Now the Rudston Monolith and the church here both stand on this spur of land, an area of high ground which gives you a great view around the wolds in this area, and it actually creates a bit of a natural amphitheatre as to where the Gypsy Race runs. So perhaps a natural place for congregations of crowd to come along these cursed ditches to see this miraculous spring. And in local folklore, the waters of the stream here are meant to give prophetic abilities. So all this helps to explain the ritual landscape around this area, and these Cist tombs containing these clay beakers are endemic of that. Now, the beakers that were in these Cist tombs you find all around East Yorkshire and the wolds, as well as areas of the North York moors and the eastern slopes of the Pennines. Also traces down near Stonehenge, and over all around Europe as well, particularly in Portugal. And at the time when these were sort of being discovered, they were interpreted to be all part of the same culture, known as the Beaker Culture. But really, we don't really know as to whether they're representative of a people or just sort of an object that was being traded or passed around, or a tradition that was being spread at the time. But you find these clay beakers in burial context, so they're obviously very important. And in some cases they've been interpreted to be drinking vessels for alcohol, but in other cases they've been interpreted to be objects to be used for smelting metals. And in the case of the Cist burials here, they found the beaker along with a piece of burnt ironstone, iron ore, suggesting that there was perhaps metallurgy going on with the individual buried here. Obviously an important and valuable trade at the time. So an important burial for a skilled and important person. So that helps to explain why the Rudston Monolith is here on this spur of land overlooking the Great Walled Valley and the Gypsy Race stream, and why there's this seemingly ceremonial landscape all concentrated on this area. But why is the church here? Now, as discussed, there's a bit of a clue in the place name, Rudston. Clearly the monolith here was converted into a preaching cross with a cross on top of it. And then later the church was built in 1100 AD. Now, Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People gives us a bit of a clue as to what was going on here. He records that Pope Gregory came across some slaves in the marketplace in Rome when he was taken by their fair skin, blonde hair, and he was told that they were Angles from Britain here in northern Britain. And his reply was, non angli sed angeli, not angles but angels. And when he found out that the Angles had in fact rejected the Christianity that had been introduced under the Romans and Emperor Constantine, he made his mission to send missionaries out to Britain to try and reconvert them. And amongst the Gregorian mission were St. Augustine and another archbishop called Mellitus, who was the first Archbishop of London. He actually founded St. Paul's Cathedral. And upon arriving here in Britain, they corresponded back with Pope Gregory, explaining that they found that the British peoples already had their own gods, their own religions, their own temples, and they were going to be a tough nut to crack. And this is Pope Gregory's letter to Mellitus, as recorded by Bede. We have been giving careful thought to the affairs of the English, and have come to the conclusion that the temples of the idols among that people should on no account be destroyed. The idols are to be destroyed, but the temples themselves are to be aspersed with holy water, altars set up in them, and relics deposited there. For if these temples are well built, they must be purified from the worship of demons and dedicated to the service of the true God. In this way, we hope that the people, seeing that their temples are not destroyed, may abandon their error and, flocking more readily to their accustomed resorts, may come to know and adore the true God. He then goes on to say, and since they have a custom of sacrificing many oxen to demons, let some other solemnity be substituted in its place, such as a day of dedication or the festivals of the holy martyrs, whose relics are enshrined there. Now that's interesting, because the Cist burial with the 2 cremations in it was also accompanied by an ox skull, and the antiquarian who excavated down below the Rudston Monolith said that he found skulls in there which he interpreted to be sacrifices. But clearly there's parallels there with what Pope Gregory is saying in his letter to Mellitus. Now Bede also gives us a bit more information about this idea of incorporating pre-Christian festivities into the Christian worship, and that's in his other work called On the Reckoning of Time, and we mentioned that when we were looking at the door at Skipwith, and if you're on YouTube you can see the video for that up here. Now in chapter 15 of On the Reckoning of Time, Bede talks about the English months, and he says this: in olden time the English people calculated their months according to the course of the moon. Hence, after the manner of the Greeks and the Romans, the months take their name from the moon, for the moon is called Mona and the month Monath. So our word for month is from the original Anglo-Saxon Mona for moon, Monath meaning month. So he goes on to say the first month, which the Latins called January, is Giuli. February is called Solmonath, March Hrefmonath, and April Eostermonath. So he later elaborates that Eostermonath has a name which is now translated Paschal month, or Easter, and which was once called after a goddess of theirs called Eoster, in whose honour feast was celebrated in that month. Now they designate that Paschal season by her name, calling the joys of the new rite by the time-honoured name of the old observance. So it's essentially saying that Eostermonath was the name of a month associated with Eoster, a pre-Christian goddess of fertility and dawn who was celebrated at springtime, and have essentially taken the name of Eostermonath and attributed that to the Christian festival which we now know as Easter. So lots and lots of food for thought there, inspired by the Rudston Monolith, the tallest standing stone in all of the British Isles, sitting in the middle of this large ceremonial landscape with All Saints Church right next to it, the Cist burial in the corner behind me here, and the name of the village itself, named after the Rood stane, Rudston. So, lots to think about this Easter tide. I hope to see you in the next video, but until then, keep church searching.